You're talking about an asset that's at 40,000, could easily go to 400,000. It's redefining money as we know it. The total addressable market for Bitcoin is literally $400 trillion. And I've said for many years now, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you.
Max Keiser is one of the true visionaries who thinks that Bitcoin can overtake gold. He also thinks that Bitcoin can provide opportunities we have not seen since the Renaissance. He thinks Bitcoin is going to be absolutely revolutionary. Let's hear what he has to say.
With the gold cartel, you need participation of everyone in the cartel to keep the price suppressed, because they all get to make a little money doing that. There's a natural buyer of gold. Gold always has a buyer. Central banks are always in the gold market. So you know pretty much that the demand for gold is pretty much omnipresent. There's always some demand for gold. If you can go into the market and manipulate prices using derivatives contracts, which in this case would mean counterfeiting sale orders to drop the price discovery mechanism by counterfeiting and putting counterfeit sell orders into the market, which drives the price down, you have the ability then to just sit back, wait for the natural demand to come in, which there always is demand for gold, and then ride it on the way up again. And this seesaw back and forth is how the gold cartel is able to book, 1 or 2% a week trading gold. But if you leverage that, you're making 30 or 40% a year, but really with no risk at all. But with the Bitcoin price, because it's this new asset class that ultimately competes with gold, that means it's going to go from just under $1 trillion market cap to $10 trillion market cap. You're talking about an asset that's at 40,000, could easily go to 400,000 in a relatively short period of time. So you don't want to be the guy in the cartel who's short Bitcoin when it's about to make a 10x move. So it's very difficult to maintain that cartel in a Bitcoin scenario because it's got that huge upside potential yet, because it's redefining money as we know it. So it's going to attract, by the nature of this new digital synthetic commodity, buyers are going to essentially rule price discovery. It's going to be very difficult to keep a sell order in this mix where you've got this upward trajectory of a new asset class where the total addressable market for Bitcoin is literally $400 trillion, which is the total market cap of all investable securities, stocks, bonds, property, all derivatives, all these things taken in aggregate is $400 trillion. So, and that is potentially the total market addressable market for Bitcoin. It can demonetize. I think it's already demonetizing gold, just like gold demonetized silver, right? Used to be on a bimetal standard. Now we're on a gold standard. Silver got demonetized. Bitcoin is now demonetizing gold. It'll demonetize the property market. It'll demonetize the bond market. The bond market's a $200 trillion market. Bitcoin's not even at a 1 trillion. That's a 200x right there. So to get back to the price suppression, of course, there will be a lot of price discovery games being played with a lot of derivatives. But ultimately, unlike gold, it'll have this natural upward bias. The second thing is that gold is very difficult, and nobody really wants to stand for delivery of gold. Yes. So when you're in the gold business, it's all paper settled and it's all cash settled. And people rarely would say, I've got a ton of gold in the market I'm bidding for. I'm going to take delivery of it. I'm not going to. The gold, you've got to ship it. You've got to insure it. You've got to store it, right? Moving gold around is very difficult. Shipping it and storing it. With Bitcoin, because you don't have any of that cost whatsoever, and you control the private key, any laddered, manipulative price discovery edifice can be quickly destroyed by pulling your private key, because it's the base level of any manipulative scheme, any Ponzi scheme would have. If you can pull it, the whole thing collapses. So that's a unique attribute of Bitcoin, which gold has doesn't nowhere comes close with that ability either, because you can move $1 billion, $20 billion in Bitcoin in one, in a transaction, one transaction that's completely frictionless. It's costless. It might cost $5 to move $1 billion. So these things work in its favor against a manipulative cartel emerging to keep the price from realizing its natural bias toward demonetizing every financial asset in the world due to its superiority in every way.
Max brings up some really critical points here on how markets like the gold market end up being manipulated, but as he discussed, he doesn't think that you will see that with Bitcoin, and I tend to think that he has some really great points. There are obviously risks to big corporations like BlackRock getting into Bitcoin, but he has some great points of how Bitcoin cannot be super easily manipulated. For example, the fact that you have full access to all your funds with Bitcoin is such a critical but small thing that a lot of people overlook. They cannot really run a true Ponzi scheme because, as he said, as soon as you pull out your funds, everything tumbles down behind it. With a Ponzi scheme, they have to distribute it as they want. With Bitcoin, you could do whatever you want with your money. Nobody has control of your money except for you, as long as you have your private keys. He also thinks another big thing is that Bitcoin can explode, unlike gold, right? If you invested in gold 10 years ago, yeah, you're probably up somewhat, but you're not up anywhere near what you're up with Bitcoin. As we've seen, even Bitcoin in the past 30, 90 days has absolutely exploded. Now, one of the major threats to manipulation in different markets, obviously you have big funds like BlackRock, but you also have the central bank trying to manipulate fiat currency or potentially trying to manipulate cryptocurrency with CBDCs. Now let's hear what Max has to say about central bank digital currencies.
Clearly, CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, are on the other side of the fight toward individual sovereignty and freedom. Because CBDCs are highly centralized, highly controlled. It's the fiat money on steroids. It's fiat money, everything you hate about fiat money, but much worse. And so that's clearly on the battle it will be fought against central bank digital currencies. And I think that what we can look for and what we can be helpful about is that the battle is going to be all about energy and energy use. And Bitcoin uses a lot of energy. We know this. And so do CBDCs, so does the military use a lot of energy. So does AI, artificial intelligence, use a lot of energy. And we want most of the energy, or all of the energy, we want it to be hashing Bitcoin. So Bitcoin and the energy used by Bitcoin is the energy that gives everyone individual sovereignty and freedom and the ability to opt out of the monetization of violence and to opt into the monetization of love or the demonetization of violence. That's what the energy usage in Bitcoin allows us to do. And the good news is, if you look at the amount of energy that Bitcoin uses, what's called the hash rate, it's absolutely skyrocketing. And it's never been in a bear market, really. It's been going up for 12, 13 years. And that tells me, from a spiritual perspective, that the forces of good are throwing energy at Bitcoin as a way to fight against evil. And I think today, if you were to look at the amount of energy that Bitcoin uses and the rate at which it's increasing, you would say good is triumphing over evil. So this gives me a lot of hope. And I don't think centralization in anything works at all, except cancer. Cancer is the only thing that seems to work to be overly centralized and parasitic. That's the cancer model. But I think we're going to win against the cancer of CBDCs.
Now, Max brings up some really interesting perspectives on the war and framing it of war of good versus evil in relation to central bank digital currencies and cryptocurrencies. We have seen countless times throughout history different governments around the world exploiting their currency to harm their citizens economically and harming others through war. The United States has done this so many times, where we have harmed our citizens through manipulating our currency, but also we have harmed other countries in our quest for oil and other resources. The US government is able to do that because they have all the control over the fiat currencies, but with something like Bitcoin, they don't have the control. Let's hear Max talk more about the separation of currency from political governments.
Well, one of the interesting attributes of Bitcoin is that for the first time in history, it separates money from the state, or it separates money from any centralized control whatsoever. So money becomes something entirely different than we've been used to in our entire history as humans on this planet. Most of the time, we have two problems with money. One is concentration of power or concentration of wealth, because money throughout history has been pretty much what's called proof of stake. If I have a lot of money, I have influence, and I can change laws to make it easier for me to get more money. It's corruption, and it's because of the nature of the money that we've had for millennia. And the same applies to gold, by the way. But with Bitcoin, it's a system called proof of work. It's not proof of stake. And no matter how many Bitcoin anybody has or any organization has, they have no influence at all to change the protocol. So it's very egalitarian in that sense. The BlackRock is a useful idiot, right? Because they've got a lot of money and they're going to buy a lot of Bitcoin. And so for 12 years, we have front run BlackRock. This is really the first time, again, another first in history, where the average person got in there a decade before Wall Street did, right? So when we was doing Keiser report, Bitcoin was $1. We talked about it as a new asset class. We said that it had the potential to go to $100,000. A lot of people we know bought 1,000 Bitcoin, 2,000 Bitcoin for a couple of $1,000, right? They're sitting on 40, 50, 60 million dollars.
Money has always historically created a concentration of power and wealth. There is huge potential for corruption. We see that all the time with different politicians insider trading, different politicians being bribed, things happening in our world that we do not want to have. But Bitcoin is proof of work, not proof of stake. Just because you have a ton of money with Bitcoin doesn't mean that you can fundamentally change Bitcoin. Now, of course, if you have enough money, you can try and manipulate the prices of Bitcoin, but Bitcoin still stays central to how it operates. People can still acquire it. You cannot stop people from acquiring Bitcoin. This is something that we've seen quite a few times with different politicians. I really think that Max is onto something here with the importance of the fact that your wealth cannot be confiscated by the government. We saw this happen a lot. For example, in Canada, when you had the protests against lockdowns, you ended up seeing the Canadian government go ahead and freeze people's bank accounts. It was really scary what was happening. That happened in other countries too, not to just hate on Canada, but we saw this happen where different governments would go ahead, they say, you cannot speak out against our corruption, you cannot speak out against what we're doing, and if you do, we are going to take your money from you, your means of production, your means of providing for your family, we're going to take that from you. We see that happen all the time, but with cryptocurrency, they can't do that. And this gives us the ability to protect our voices as we speak out against corruption, as we speak out against BlackRock, poor business practices. We can actually do that. We can also pursue art and creativity more with things like Bitcoin than with fiat currency. It provides so many unique opportunities that we have not really seen since the Renaissance. Let's hear Max talk about that.
It's the first time in history that anybody on any budget can store their wealth, and it can be unconfiscatable, and the price of protecting that wealth is virtually zero. If you look at how wealth is aggregated today, usually those with a lot of wealth spend a lot of money protecting that wealth. They have security guards, they have vaults, they have a lot of lawyers, they have a lot of accountants, there's a lot of politicians, right? There's a huge cost to protecting and maintaining that wealth. Well, with Bitcoin, you don't need any of that. You just have to memorize your seed phrase. That's it. And that's available to anybody. So the person who's, let's say, an artist who sells art, they make, let's say, 20% of the nominal per capita income in a country, or 50% of it, the capita income. But they're happy to do that because they just want to be artists. They don't want to be grinding it out as a lawyer, perhaps. But they can put their savings into Bitcoin, and it's inflation proof. So their purchasing power will always go up. The purchasing power will mathematically continue to go up forever. And they can be free to express who they are. And I think that's part of this Renaissance 2.0, is that it frees up self-expression in a way that we haven't seen since the Enlightenment, since we haven't seen since the Renaissance. And that's totally enabled because of this savings technology, this unconfiscatable separation of money and state called Bitcoin. So all of the changes are incredibly positive. And whether this introduces another cycle, I think that I'm sure it does, but I think that the nature of this cycle is quite interesting in a number of different ways. But I don't see it being one that heads back into kind of a dystopian ditch at the end of the cycle. I think this is the beginning of something truly spiritual, which is as a species, we've been lacking in a lot of ways to make contact with that on a sustained basis. As individuals, we have moments of spiritual beauty, or we have aesthetic beauty, or we go and we see art at the museum and we're like, wow, I'm moved emotionally by this. But imagine being able to ride that wave for your entire life and just be on that vibe. Well, this is what Bitcoin offers. This is part of the philosophy of Bitcoin. Beyond the monetary and the technology of it, there's an ethos and an aesthetic that is transformative. And we see it here. So people in El Salvador, even though they don't use it, necessarily Bitcoin, they're aware of it. And once you start thinking about it, it changes the way you think. So I say, and I've said for many years now, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you.
Hopefully you agree with me when I say that Max is a visionary, when he sees the potential and the importance of cryptocurrency, how this protects us and gives us so many more opportunities as normal people. If you want to hear more of what Max has to say about the amazing potential of cryptocurrency, make sure you guys subscribe down below and leave a comment letting me know that you want to see more content just like this.